Today is Wednesday, September 13th, and we are bringing you the latest headlines from the Atlanta News First Alert Desk here in our Midtown Atlanta studios. I'm Tim Darnell, joined by our producer, Maria Moreau, and earlier today, Wednesday, September 13th, former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows was dealt another legal setback. Earlier today, U.S. District Court Judge Stephen Jones, who last week denied a request from the former White House Chief of Staff to move his case from Fulton County Superior Court to federal court, today denied a request for an emergency stay from the former White House Chief of Staff. Now, Mark Meadows is one of 19 co-defendants who were indicted several weeks ago by Fulton County District Attorney Bonnie Willis, along with the nation's 45th president, Donald Trump. These 19 co-defendants are alleged to have engaged and participated in a vast, wide-ranging criminal conspiracy and organized crime conspiracy, if you will, under Georgia's racketeering and Organized Crime Influencing Act to overturn the lawful registered results of Georgia's 2020 presidential election. Now, Mark Meadows, former President Donald Trump, and others are making repeated efforts to move their cases and their indictments and their potential trials out of Fulton County Superior Court and into a federal court. But earlier today, this morning, U.S. District Court Judge Stephen Jones denied a request for an emergency stay from the former White House Chief of Staff. All of this has very troubling implications for the former president and his other GOP allies who may be making similar attempts to move their cases out of state court and into a federal one. One of the other co-defendants in this wide-ranging case, who has not yet made that request but may soon as well, or may not, is Harrison Floyd. He is one of the 19 co-defendants, the only one who was jailed for several hours, several overnight hours at the notorious Fulton County Jail when he surrendered himself for photographing, mugshotting, and fingerprinting, and to be formally arraigned at the Fulton County Jail. Harrison Floyd, only yesterday, made an announcement that he is assisting to pay the bail for other inmates who are currently being housed at one of the most notorious jails in the entire nation, that of Fulton County Jail on Rice Street. Harrison Floyd was also the only Donald Trump Georgia indictment co-defendant who did not make cash bail and was ultimately jailed on Rice Street for several nights until he finally did make an arrangement to where he posted bail, and immediately upon his release set the world of social media ablaze with his possible announcement that he could be running for Congress in Metro Atlanta's 7th Congressional District. He did tell our political reporter, Doug Reardon, that all things and all options are on the table, but that is something we will continue to watch. The 7th Congressional District is currently held by U.S. Rep. Lucy McBath in northern Metro Atlanta. Harrison Floyd may be a candidate for Congress either next year or in the coming years. We'll have to continue to follow that. Another central figure in the Donald Trump indictment, on an unrelated note, is Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. His office continues cleaning up the state's list of active registered voters. On Tuesday, almost 190,000 allegedly inactive voters were removed from Georgia's list of active registered voters. Again, the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, who gained national attention and continues to have a national profile in his efforts to really disavow former President Donald Trump's comments that the Georgia 2020 election was mishandled or stolen, as the former president said. Raffensperger says that these continuing voter purges of reportedly inactive voters are necessary to maintain a current, up-to-date list of active voters. Currently, there are just under 8 million registered voters in Georgia, and as we all know, over the past several election cycles, Georgia has continued to set record attendance both in early voting, absentee voting, and voting turnout. Georgia is truly a national leader in terms of election turnout, and the Secretary of State is a central figure in all of this. Also, earlier this week, Governor Brian Kemp announced yesterday, in fact, that he is suspending the state's excise tax on gasoline over concerns of rising inflation across Georgia and the nation. This announcement came yesterday and was very surprising, considering that the issue of inflation really has not been making a number of political headlines, at least here in Georgia. But the governor, in a populist attempt to ease the pain at the pump that Georgians are, or he believes Georgians are feeling, has suspended for the second time in several years the state gasoline, motor fuel, petroleum excise tax. This is an issue we'll continue to follow, as well as the issue of inflation overall. In 2024, we fully expect the economy and the issue of inflation to play crucial roles in the electoral process. And I recently had a conversation with economist Louise Southall, who talks about the role of inflation that is affecting small businesses not only here in Georgia and nationwide, but also the role of inflation in next year's 2024 presidential election. Here's that interview. Inflation continues to be a hugely important topic among all of our viewers and listeners here in the Atlanta area and in Metro Atlanta. According to the latest Bureau of Labor Statistics data, inflation in Atlanta is higher than the national average across the U.S. In April of 2023, the Consumer Price Index rose from 5.8% here in Atlanta compared to the national average of 4.9%. And we're joined by Louise Southall, who is an economist at Zero, which is a small business accounting platform. Just kind of tell us what how inflation is manifesting itself among, here in Atlanta. We have more than 1 million small to medium-sized businesses here in Atlanta. It's really one of the small business capitals of the U.S. Tell us how consumers and small to medium-sized businesses, how is inflation impacting them?
Yeah, inflation is really damaging for everybody. We all feel it in our own budgets as we're trying to balance things, but it's particularly damaging for small businesses because they really get hit on two fronts. So firstly, inflation means that the prices that they're paying for all of their costs that are coming into their business are going up. They might be used to prices only going up a couple of percent in normal times, but more recently, it's been more like, the latest numbers are down, but as recently as August last year, it was almost 12% in Atlanta. So really difficult for local businesses to manage that. And they also have to deal with the fact that their customers are also managing their budgets. So they are, at the end of every paycheck, they've had to stretch a bit further for their rent, for their gas, for their groceries, for their electricity bills. And so they have a bit less left over at the end of every month or pay cycle. And so this means they've got less money to spend in small businesses. So the way I think about inflation and small business is it's really a pincer movement. They get hit on the cost side of it, but then they're also finding, because their customers are struggling, they're spending less in their business as well. And so that's why inflation is really damaging for small businesses.
Are there any particular reasons from your standpoint why inflation is higher here in Atlanta than elsewhere?
Yeah, so the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, they've done a recent review into this and looked at why do some areas of the United States have higher inflation and some have lower? Because, of course, the national number is really an average of all the regions. And what they found is that the main driver of this is housing. So housing makes up about 40% of the consumer price index, which is just a basket of goods of what the average American spends over a year. And they found that housing in the South region, of course, which Atlanta and Georgia are part of, is housing prices are growing faster than they are in the rest of the country. And so because housing is also a big chunk of the CPI, that means that consumer prices in the Atlanta region are rising faster than the national average.
So really kind of Atlanta is, because it is such a hot housing market, it's almost a victim of its own success from an economical standpoint. Is that a fair analogy?
Yeah, it's certainly, housing is certainly the main factor, behind why there's this difference between what's being experienced in Atlanta and what's being experienced across the whole nation. And of course, if you're a customer of a small business and you have to spend increasingly more on your housing, then you've got less to spend in your local small business.
Talk to us a little bit about what your impression is in terms of how consumers, businesses, even governmental and public agencies can combat the inflation. Is the inflation rate going to continue going up? Do you forecast it going down? What are some of your prognostications?
So the great news across the whole of the United States is that inflation is coming down. So we got some new statistics recently showing that in June, nationally, inflation was 3% in the United States and 4.6% in the Atlanta area. So this is much better than if we cast our mind back to the end of last year when we were talking about 9-10% sort of inflation levels. So things have really improved, but prices are still rising faster than they normally do. And so that is still challenging for small businesses and consumers. And we really encourage small businesses, when things are as challenging as they are, it's really important that they understand what is going on in their business. They need to know how their cash flow is going all the time, as opposed to just, something that they look at perhaps when they have to lodge their taxes. And by constantly monitoring it and also working with professionals like an accountant or a bookkeeper, it allows them to understand what's happening in their business and make the adjustments that they need to. And I think this is actually an area where small business does have a bit of an advantage because they're very close to their customers. They have the opportunity to really understand what is happening in their local community, and they can adjust their business accordingly to allow them to get through what is a tough time and be ready to prepare for whenever the economic upturn does come. There are a few things that small businesses can do. So they can think about their offering. Are they offering the sorts of products and services that customers want? Maybe what customers wanted, when we were all back from being in lockdowns after the pandemic, it might be quite different to what they want now. So making sure that they understand what their customers are looking for right now. And it's also a great time to offer some loyalty bonuses or discounts to those customers who are really your regulars and regularly coming into your business. So you might have a weekly special, or you might have buy 10 cups of coffee and you get your 11th one free, or that sort of thing. Rewards it helps your business get through tough times, and it's also, of course, a win-win for your customers as well, because they get to take advantage of these discounts. So there are things that small businesses can do, and also it's a great time to work actually on the operations of the business. So start exploring things like digital tools. Are you using all of the array of digital tools that are available to help you run your business better?
You mentioned the pandemic a few moments ago. So many small businesses, were forced to close because of the pandemic. For those that have survived and who made it through that unprecedented public health and economic crisis, is the higher than average inflation rate in Atlanta directly tied to the economy coming out of the pandemic, or has the economic crunch or clinch or whatever adjective you'd like to use that the pandemic caused, is that over? Are we out of the pandemic economy at this point?
Yeah, so the inflation crisis that we are experiencing, and it's not, it's globally. I'm very lucky that I have a role at Xero, which allows me to look at what's happening in small businesses all over the world. And I can assure your viewers, all the challenges that small businesses in Atlanta are juggling with are exactly the same as challenges everywhere. And the inflation situation has really arisen, yes, because we're adjusting after the pandemic. There were lots of supply chain disruptions. We couldn't get, factories were closed, so we couldn't get things. And so this was putting up pressure. And then overlaid on top of that was the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which had a big impact on energy prices. So I think if I can be more positive, I would say that the most recent numbers that we've been getting on the inflation front, particularly in the United States, have been more positive. Inflation is moving in the right direction. It's not yet back at the 2% that the Federal Reserve would like it to be, but it's getting very close. And so, there is some light at the end of the tunnel, and small businesses can take some solace that if they have, if you think about the last few years, small businesses, they've had to get through the pandemic, as you said, and then this inflation challenge as well. The light is at the end of the tunnel, and so those small businesses should be focused on that as well. But also, it's really important that local communities keep on supporting small businesses. So I think there was a real push during the pandemic. People were very empathetic and realised, if you want your local cafe or your local bookshop or your local, butcher to keep going, you had to support them. And we were really good at doing that globally during the pandemic. And we need to keep doing that for, the foreseeable future, in order to make sure that all those businesses that have got through the turbulent times of the last few years actually are there and ready to thrive and grow when things do start to improve.
Well, inflation and the economy continue to be a hot political topic here in Atlanta and Georgia and across the nations. And these are issues that we're going to continue to follow here in Atlanta News First and our Atlanta News First digital streaming platforms and applications. Wrapping up our conversation with Louise Southall, who is an economist at Xero, a small business platform. What does Xero and your product and your company actually do? I'd be remiss if I didn't give you the opportunity to plug your business here, since we're talking about small businesses.
Yeah, so we help small businesses. We're a software accounting platform. We're based in the cloud, and so that gives the extra advantage of being able to have real-time data that I talked about before as being so critical when things are tough, and to make sure that people are on top of their business. And we also have an app store that has over 1,000 apps. So when you're part of the Xero family, it's not just about using accounting software. You can also connect hundreds of apps to your account, which allow you to run your business as well. So covering things like invoice management, payroll, doing quotes, anything that you can think of as a task to do in a small business, Xero's probably got an app for it.
All right. Thanks to Louise Southall, who is an economist at Xero, talking to us about inflation and how it is affecting consumers and small businesses here in Atlanta. And thanks to all of you for watching here on Atlanta News First and AtlantaNewsFirst.com.